Bonjay is an electronic, soul, and dancehall duo based in Toronto, Ontario. Consisting of Alana Stewart and Ian Swain, Bonjay released EPs in 2009 and 2010, and then spent the subsequent years touring, traveling, writing, and living life. All of those experiences have fed into the production of their first full-length album, 2018's Lush Life, which is out via Mysteries of Trade. Alana, Ian, and I met at the Entertainment One studios in Toronto recently to discuss Bonjay, the concept of diversity, the songs on Lush Life, and much, much more. With in-kind support from Pizza Trokadero, The Bookshelf, and Planet Bean Coffee in Guelph, Grandad's Donuts in Hamilton, and Planet of Sound locations in Ottawa and Toronto, and, of course, flexible monthly pledges by listeners like you at patreon.com/Creative Control. This is the 398th episode of Creative Control, featuring Bonjay, with your host, me, Vish Khanna.
I'm well, Vish. How are you?
I'm well. Nice to have you back in my presence. You have never been on this show. I almost said welcome back to the show.
I've listened many times.
Yes, you've been very kind in your support of the show.
Yeah. So it's nice to be here in conversation with you.
Does it feel like you have been on the show? Is that why I was mistaken?
Actually, you know what? We had a live version for, I think it was Wavelength, Lido Pimienta. Oh,
no, I didn't host that one.
Oh, you didn't host that one.
My daughter, I think, was being born at that point, and
right.
then I think it was Vanessa Dunn.
Yes.
From Vag Halen.
Yes.
Did I asked her to fill in for me on
right.
Long Night, and she got I don't remember who else.
Lido
was on.
Pimienta.
Yeah.
And Aria Evans, a dancer, an Indigenous obviously Canadian Indigenous dancer.
Yeah.
It was a night of powerful women,
That's
and
right.
then a future powerful woman was being born.
My daughter.
Your daughter.
I hope is who you mean.
Yes.
Yeah,
Ramona.
Yeah. Ramona, yeah, she's amazing. She is amazing. All right. Well, it's nice to have you. And you, sir?
Ian,
how are you?
I'm good, thank you.
It's nice to have you
too
here on the show. Now, I'm astonished to learn. First of all, congratulations on Lush Life.
Thank you.
I've been listening to it a lot, and I really enjoy it. But I was reading the promotional material. How is it possible that this is this really your first album?
Yeah. Yeah, we put out, I guess, a couple of EPs, really.
Mm-hmm.
But when did we? So you and I, I've interviewed you before,
mm-hmm.
and when was that? I don't remember when that was. It must have been for the first EP or something, or
I think it was our second EP,
Brought
Up EP.
So when did that come out?
I think you probably interviewed us in early 2011.
So 7 years ago, I interviewed you for one of your. Was that you're saying that was your second EP?
The second
mm-hmm.
thing that
so
we put
how
out.
did it? And things happen for a reason. But
mm-hmm.
how is it possible that it's been 7 years since you've put out your first? It took you that long to make your first record. That's.
Wow,
Well,
Vish, you're the first person to point this out.
I know.
So far.
It has been a long time. I hadn't realized how long it had been.
Well, I don't mean to draw attention to time because I know that's a tired thing that people. Hey, what are you doing? It's been 4 years, but 4 years between second, third, fourth album.
Right.
I've been hearing about Bonjay forever.
Yeah.
And I just was like, how can that be the first album?
Yeah.
I thought I missed something. Like, what is going on? So what is happening? Which one of you has delayed production on this record because you didn't think it was ready?
Setting up some drama
It's a
already.
loaded question.
I don't know that.
What
I
an
don't know
instigator.
that. I don't think it's that the album wasn't ready. Truth be told, we had another version of the album that we could have released,
Mm-hmm.
but we didn't feel ready in terms of where we could be, what our vision was, and the skills that we had, and so we gave ourselves the gift of time to fill that gap, and
It definitely feels like we live in an era when there is no shortage of new music that is released.
It's fair.
Yeah.
No, it's true. That is absolutely
overwhelming wave of music is such that it only feels like it's worth releasing something if you feel like you've come up with something unique that you're proud of. It seems like the most fully formed version.
Well, wait a minute, Atlanta. When you say that there was a previous record done, Was it this record in a different form with these songs, or was it just totally different?
It was some of these songs.
Some of these songs,
yeah,
but
some
in
of these songs,
different forms.
Yeah, different forms, and we have probably a few albums worth of music and instrumentals and vocalized songs that could have gone on the record. These are the songs that had to be on Lush Life.
I do really believe that these things happen for a reason, right?
It feels like it.
Yeah.
It's easy. When that much time goes by and when you're in the middle of developing, learning dance and movement for live performance so that my body can feel more free, going back to voice lessons so that my vocal cords could sustain the power of these vocal deliveries on tour night after night. Ian going back to music theory and studying music by Minnie Riperton and Chili Gonzalez arrangements, all those things. It feels like you're running, but you're running through mud, So you're working, but you're pushing up against the resistance of the learning curve. And over, the course of those years, and while you're developing, every once in a while, feel panic, like, oh my God, what if they forget about us, or what if it is too late? But I remember meeting a music journalist of high esteem, and he said, people aren't going to forget. Come out when the music is ready. Come out when it's good.
Yeah.
Don't come out when you think people are going to get tired or impatient. Like Ian said, there's plenty of music to keep people busy with. So,
and I think time isn't arbitrary, but it is sort of our relationship with time is a little arbitrary.
Yeah.
I mean, there's no cycle that you have. Is this record on a label per se?
Our label.
It's on your label, so you are in charge of your fate. There's no one pressuring you to get a record in by a deadline, which is an amazing thing to have as an artist.
Yeah.
You create when you're ready to create, and you put things out when you're ready to put them out. But I mean, Ian, don't you think music and its valuation has changed dramatically in 7 years? I mean, we are at a point where I don't think music is... And I say this having primarily a music, and I have a music culture show, but I cover music and I'm invested in music as a fan, as a journalist, as a broadcaster, whatever. And I keep landing on this thing where I feel like music isn't valued the same way as it was. Did you notice that as well on some level? Was that kind of a thing where, like, you say, there's plenty of music out there, but do you think it's as valued in 2018 as it was in 2011?
I think that it was not some kind of strategic choice for us to take longer to finish the album for that reason.
Right.
But it's definitely, a characteristic that we've noticed. You ever heard about that book, The Paradox of Choice, by Barry Schwartz?
Yeah,
it's like a pop science kind of book from like 15 years ago.
Yes.
Yeah. I think when something ceases to be scarce, I don't know, the dynamics of it change or something. And so
its value changes, and at least the perception of its value changes.
Yeah. And so I feel like the big change of the last few years is probably carrying around potentially every song ever made in your pocket, more or less, right? And the way that works. So it has changed things a little bit. I mean, music is still such an opportunity to tell stories that are not being told. It's such a good way to lend a personal and emotional side to things that are happening. But I think now, more than like in the 80s or 90s or some decade when we weren't really making our own music, you have to like work harder for something to say. It used to be that the music and the messages that were out there that were widespread were controlled by a small number of people.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Right?
Sure.
And it's a pretty cool thing that now, if you want to be exposed to like a different way of living or a different understanding of the world, then you can grab that on social media, on blogs, on all kinds of publications. You can be exposed to different ideas and stuff through all kinds of music. But once it becomes an avalanche and an overthrow, it does change a little bit the process of making music. Mm-hmm. I think now it's more like building a trusted relationship than it used to be.
Yeah, I was going to say, as you were talking about, you mentioned earlier, it wasn't a strategic choice to take that long to make the record. obviously it would have been a dumb strategic choice. But, with those changes that you talked about and people being faced with this avalanche of, we don't even call it music anymore, we call it content,
Well, some people do. Yeah, that's true.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You hope that people take the time to listen. And because you can't take that for granted, for us, we had to make sure that we put in the time to create music and, for us anyway, to tell stories that would resonate and grab hold with the people that we could reach. And with Lush Life, the stories that we're telling are stories that exist outside of us. It's about the way we live in cities today. And so I'm hoping that I have faith that the way we've conveyed the present moment and the nuanced view we have of everyday life in the city, we don't have to grab everybody, but if it can mean something to the people that we do reach, then it feels worth it. And I'm confident in that.
We would like to be the Edward Tufte or Jane Jacobs of music. They put out a book every 5 years or so, but it's really
good.
meaningful.
That's fair. That makes sense. I can see you guys as those people for sure. Tell me about this. I end up talking about cities with people all the time on the show, particularly with the way real estate's working right now and the way cities are kind of closing in on us a little bit, but also like becoming more exclusive for some people. What are you talking about in terms of cities and Lush Life? I know you were just saying that, you're exploring stories in cities from different perspectives, but why did you land upon cities and cityscapes as a potential landscape for this record?
Maybe I go first and then you can jump in.
Yeah, because I really feel like the connection between the overall theme of how we live in cities today and the narratives that are shared on the album also highlights the differences between Ian and I. So,
and you're both based in Toronto still, right? And how long have you both lived? How long have you lived in Toronto, Ian?
11 years. No, I'm from Ottawa.
You're from
I
Ottawa.
came here to go to school.
11 years. And
I'm from Ottawa and Brampton.
Right, that's right.
Yeah,
Right.
and I've been here 12 years.
12 years, okay. So I feel like that's germane. Just like being in Toronto of all cities in this country and then coming up with this concept, I imagine it's related on some level. But go forth, Ian.
I think it's related a lot to touring, for sure.
I see.
So in my life outside of music, I work as an economist, but not the kind of economist that wears a gray suit and talks about the money supply, but more the kind that looks at cities, right? Like Jane Jacobs would be my favorite economist of all time, my hero sort of in that realm. So I think that was the starting point, is because that is, outside of music, the thing that occupies my brain the most, right? Like, why do cities exist? How do they grow? How do they take on their unique character? I think we live in an age when, because all information can be accessed, or virtually all information can be accessed from your phone in your pocket, what you're actually surrounded by in physical space in a city almost has more to do with what possibilities are open to you, what potential things could happen in your life. And we kind of saw an opportunity to tell some stories that were not being told, because I think that the city in song has been presented as either it's tough, it's the ghetto, it's these things, or it's kind of a playground for artists where anything is possible, and that like lower Manhattan in the late 70s sort of archetype, right? Which, and through the 80s and 90s, cities did feel like that, like the original Queen West scene and everything. But
you're talking about city landscapes that are sort of in disrepair and are sort of dilapidated and almost undesirable for a certain sector of society. And then when you talk about Manhattan in the 70s, for instance, I mean, New York was a cesspool, and it was like punk rockers and people come in, art rockers and sort of artists coming in and making it a vibrant place to live again and culturally enriching it, which in turn made it impossible to live there.
Right.
Because it became a hotspot again.
It became in demand as a result of
Montreal,
the efforts and
that's
sacrifices.
Right. The same
of
things
these
would
artists.
happen in Montreal in the last 18, 19, 20 years or something, where all these loft spaces were being taken up by artists and musicians, and for like dirt cheap rent, and now it's getting harder and harder to find places to live there.
Right. And so
anyway,
so that kind of narrative, I feel like that story has been told.
It has
a lot. We wanted to broaden it a bit, and you can tell I'm like the more conceptual one. Like they would be really crappy songs if it was just me there writing these songs, right? But Alana brings the personal side, and the lived experience of a lot of these things, putting herself into the. I like how that implies that I'm a robot, basically. But
Humanist.
Coming up with the music, and it's a little robotic, maybe on some level, but not exactly. But yeah.
But anyway, the story we wanted to expand it out a bit because I think that probably the great project of the 21st century is cities all over the world are drawing in all these people from the hinterlands, from all elsewhere in the world, and it's pretty unprecedented in history that they can actually make it work. Living together, that people feel like there's an opportunity, they feel at home in this place. It's fair to people. I mean, there really is no historical precedent in thousands of years of human history that we can do this. So it's kind of our great challenge of the modern era. And rather than just being about artists and that sort of reviving, this dilapidated Hamilton kind of landscape through your artistry, being able to live cheap and dream big and stuff, we wanted to tell the stories of like other risk takers as well. So the immigrant experience, which, we would go on tour and every city has a unique character, but they all have their groups of immigrants, right? Whether it's all the Filipino people in Winnipeg or we haven't actually been to Nashville, but I heard that Nashville has the largest population of Kurds outside of Iraq and Turkey, etc. Nashville, exactly. But these kinds of things exist all over the place, right? You go to different cities, and especially outside of the big ones where all the media are clustered, like Toronto and New York and London, there are these little nooks and crannies of stories happening.
It's often I think it's often word of mouth, so to speak. Like
chain migration.
Like my family, one of my uncles came to the Scarborough area, and then suddenly all of his brothers and sisters, including my mom, were sort of we were in Cambridge, but sort of an hour away. But I think they just heard, it'll work if we all come. Like it'll work. It worked. It's working out.
Yeah.
I got a job, and
right.
I was able to get us an apartment or something. And it is interesting how that works. So you've come up with the conceptual thing. Alana steps in to say she brings some of the humanity, some of these stories.
I plug in the human setting.
So how do you
in the database?
Well, actually, can I jump in one more? Okay, I just wanted to say that. So immigrants, artists, entrepreneurs as well. We kind of wanted to draw the common thread between all these people who come to the city to create new things, whether it's building a new life, because if you're an immigrant, you're kind of one of the most courageous people you can imagine. You've thrown away everything that you knew in order to build something new. If you start a company, then most of those fail as well, and it's a brutal process. So
we
kind of wanted to tell the story of sort of the beauty and the chaos of the sorts of ambitious, courageous people who come to cities to make new things. Let's say,
so how newcomers to the city can actually enrich that city on some level.
Oh, I mean that goes without saying. I think this is more telling.
It's
telling
an
their
even
stories.
more microscopic.
Okay,
it's a more microscopic view because I think if it was just talking about the potential of a city, it would become like a marketing campaign for a municipality or something.
Sure.
Come to the city; it's a land of opportunity,
right?
And there are opportunities. That is a reality, but there, are certain groups of people who may not necessarily have the same access to those opportunities or are not in a position to take advantage of them, or that opportunity is not what you thought it was when you actually landed in a certain place or encountered a certain person. And I wanted to, it's not even as though I wanted to, it's in my nature to relate on a really deep human level. What does an everyday experience in the city look or feel or sound or smell like? There's so many different experiences and so many different people coming here and looking for those opportunities. They're intersecting with each other and not knowing each other's stories. So I wanted to imagine, if you were at a crosswalk and seeing a group of people walking across and you were to follow them for a day, what would you see? So everything from Devil's Night, talking about a young couple who, have lost their passion to ambition, or talking about an ingenue who left the safety of a carved out path in maybe the suburbs with her family, and the guide of religion to go to the city and experiment with different ways of being. I wanted to have a more microscopic view of some of the broader conceptual ideas that Ian introduced.
So it's microscopic. Does that make it voyeuristic as well? Like, is this based on observations you've made of people, or are these imagined
It's
stories?
both real and imagined.
Yeah.
There are a couple times where I invited a friend for a walk, and I said, just tell me about yourself. And I'd write notes, and I would write a story from that. Or it's this weird thing that happens to me at parties where I'm incapable of small talk. And a conversation will start with, hello, what's your name? And then somebody will tell me about their single mom who had them when they were a teenager, when she was a punk rocker, and what it was like growing up in that environment. I've had conversations like this with people on tour and
that's so you.
And at parties, and it just gets very real very fast. And
do you feel like this is something about you that draws people out?
I've been told that, and I'm not sure what it is.
Huh.
I think maybe it's a blank stare where people don't know what I'm thinking, and so they just keep talking until I flinch, and I never do.
You don't have a blank. No, I don't think that's true. I think certain people have a certain aura, a trusting aura, or an openness.
I'm definitely open,
Yeah.
and if we're being honest and not just talking about the record, I think my upbringing has a lot to do with it as well. My mother was a foster mother for quite some time, and she was a respite foster mother. And so what that means is we would get kids who maybe have been taken immediately out of their home and have to be placed somewhere before they're sent to a permanent spot, or long-term foster parents need just a weekend off. We would get foster children. And so we had a steady rotation of people from all over, Jamaican Canadians, French Canadians, Italian Canadians, Inuit children, a young woman who just came from Brazil. You get to know people very quickly, and you're living with them, so it's in a very, very personal way. And you're also encountering a lot of their trauma, a lot of their pain. And these are young children, and I'm a young child, and I grew up with being able to bear witness to people's stories. And not, as a child, you don't really pass judgment. I do think that is a foundation of how I socialize and how I understand people. I don't take anybody's external identifiers or their current situation for granted. And also, it just gave me a deep dive into life at a really young age.
That's a tremendous amount of empathy to have to encounter, like to basically put out into the world and
especially
deal with at that age, I would think.
Yeah, and I mean, it was also fun and exciting to live with so many different people and learning how to swear in so many different languages. And I had learned the Muslim prayer and with my brother Tabish, and I learned a lot, and so it was fun. But I don't want to reveal too much about the process. I'll just say that I think it did instill this deep empathy and this ability to listen and this ability to just observe and accept a certain situation. And sometimes it's a tough place to be in, because when you hear opposing views encounter each other, I can't help but want to be a mediator, and I can see the connection or where the disconnect is happening. In terms of songwriting, without being exploitative, I think it put me in this emotion. I'm automatically in this emotionally raw place. I'm drawing from a deeper well of emotion and stories. And none of the stories on here are derivative of, I'm not telling my foster brothers and sisters stories. And like I said, I'm not being exploitative, but I just think that it's become a part of how I convey a narrative.
So this explains, I think, to some degree, where the conceptual and storytelling aspects of your music on this record come from. But as a singer, as a musician, how does everything we've just discussed inform your respective approaches to that and how you've come together here. Ian, can you deal with that question first? I'm just curious. I mean, how do you take these kinds of concepts and try to convey them within the sonic aspect of a record like this?
I think it's more the songwriting side. I think it would be kind of corny if it was like all samples from the city.
I don't think of it as samples, but there's a few moments on the record where I guess I knew a little bit about the context before we spoke. And there's a couple of musical swells and a couple of things going on where there's clatter and there's sort of, there's not discord per se, but there's just this sense of the kind of overwhelming feeling I have when I'm waiting to cross the street in Toronto or get on the subway or something like that. And just that kind of weird anticipation of stillness and movement that you get in the city sometimes, in a bigger city.
I guess that comes from, trying to capture a mood. And so we'll usually come up with the concepts first. That's definitely something. I mean, the whole thing is like a partnership. You wouldn't believe the things that I do that you would think Alana does, and all the stuff that Alana does.
I'm obviously being totally reductive and being like, you're the singer, you're the music person. I don't know. I'll
correct you in a second.
Well, I will say, like, I know that that's not how this works. But on the surface area, on a superficial level, that's what people assume. So I was trying to make some space for you to clarify that. And also explain how you cohere here.
Yeah, let's run with it. So often it might be me that has the seed of a song concept, because, you know what, a big thing in making the record was there's so much music that comes out now that is like a combination of existing things or like a reworking of an existing sound. And the reason that we always say the way we live in cities today is because we wanted to write about real things that we were experiencing and seeing and be directly influenced by life. A lot of our favorite music, I mean, we listen to music from, the 50s, 60s, 70s, right through to the present. And a lot of our favorite music is unique and about that time and place. So that was a big thing. I think
it had a kind of topicality to it that, you know what I mean? Like it kind of feels of a place and about a place. That's what you're saying.
Yeah.
Are you also suggest there's music that feels anchorless as well, isn't there? There's music that could be from any time, and that's got its own limitations on some level.
I'm thinking about like a lot of one of my favorite genres is like 60s, 70s orchestral soul stuff.
Yeah.
So like Aretha Franklin and her sisters, who would write a lot of the songs. The Marvin Gaye stuff, Curtis Mayfield, Labi Siffre. I mean, there's like dozens of people. But that very much of the time and place, right? The civil rights movement was happening, and they would sing about that directly. There's some music that comes out now that is hearkening back to that kind of sound and so on. And a lot of it is really lovely, well-assembled music. But for us, the path that we chose was let's seek what they sought, not follow in their footsteps, let's say, right? Let's make a record that maybe in years down the road, people think that it sounds like now. And so I guess maybe it sounds like the city indirectly, because we're thinking about these concepts of like the feeling of Night Bus Blue, the last song on the record, really swells and is big and is full of tension and so on. It's about that time when you ride the night bus at like 4:30 in the morning, when it's a mix between people who are starting their day to go to work and who are finishing their day because they've been out drinking and partying and whatever. And just the energy of ambition and despair and the contrasts. Cities are great places for people from very different walks of life meeting. So yeah, it would be like we come up with the concept for the song, and Alana can talk a bit more about that. But it sounds like that because the song is about a real thing that we're trying to capture.
Yeah, but I think even on a basic production level, sonically, I think what people are hearing is the natural result of our symbiosis and the differences between us, again, Ian being a robot and me being a human. So...
You're getting way too confident.
I know,
stuff, yeah.
I know. No, but
well, I will say, like, you're singing, and one of the reasons I did a weird distinction between you two is because, sometimes we talk about rappers having different flows or singers having a dynamic range, but like you are amazingly all over the map here. Like your voice is just doing things I didn't even know you could do. Like I'm familiar
I'm
with...
smiling, but I don't know if that's actually a compliment. You're just like, you just did weird
No, not weird.
stuff.
No, not weird. I mean, impressive, like super impressive stylistic choices and
Thank you.
phrasing ideas. And like, I'm just marveling at you as a singer here. And I mean, for people who don't know, like you're beyond Bonjay and maybe some other stuff, like you are an in-demand sort of backup person. Like people call you in to... You're a fixer. You're a vocal fixer, I would say. They want you on there because they know you're good. and like, yeah, just hearing the power and the thought you put into your attack on certain songs. And that's kind of what I was going for, too. I feel like your singing tells a story.
Thank you.
That's very you also, because you don't, you're not super proficient in any instrument. So you'll often think about
true.
all the layers of a song in vocals. That's a very characteristic thing.
Passive-aggressive, gentle ribbing between you two. That's fascinating.
Like, you're not actually that skilled.
You're
It's
not
just you
proficient
just
in music.
kind of...
You're a robot and I'm a human. Like, there's just like this is becoming an airing of grievances. Bonjay
Softly.
intervention.
We're on our best behavior
I do
here.
think that, but I do want to go back to the differences between us because somehow it works. I've said this a few times that Bonjay shouldn't work on paper. Ian is a hip hop DJ turned producer, influenced by classic soul. I grew up singing gospel music in the Jamaican Pentecostal church. We both love dance hall, but I'm a part of I consider the indie community, the community that I'm most deeply embedded in.
Kind of indie rock stuff.
Indie rock stuff, yeah. Like the Local Rabbits are my favorite band of all time.
Yeah.
I'm a forever fan of Ben Gunning, whose lyricism has greatly influenced the way he tells stories.
One of the smartest writers ever, yeah.
Oh my gosh, yeah. And I don't know if he realizes it.
Well, I think I can't speak for Ben. I got to get Ben on this show. I said this to Pete Elkis the other night because I was talking to Pete about something. It was also in the Local Rabbits. And yeah, I got to get Ben on this show. Ben's too smart for me, though. Every time I interview Ben, I'm like, I couldn't hang in there. Like, he's just very smart, and his lyrics are amazing. And
I was
like
just singing backup on his new record.
Oh, great.
And Robin Dan from Bernice and Alex Samaras, the three of us were always like, we feel so lucky that we get to sing on it, And then he'll make this beautiful ragu and this beautiful meal, and then we'll go and record
He's
again.
a special guy, Ben Gunning, I think.
He really is.
Yeah.
But in terms of the communities that we came up in, and the sounds that we were bringing to the table, I wouldn't necessarily theorize that Bonjay should work, but I think that what's come out of that tension is something special, and our approach to making that work is again rooted in our symbiosis. So Ian is really a craftsman when it comes to coming up with new sounds and using tools to carve them out and create unique timbres and textures to them. I have a more intuitive approach to making music, and so I do feel like I feel in my body whether those sounds are working or not. I check with my body whether the groove is right. I could feel whether the BPM is off by 1 or 2 BPM by moving my body to it. And so I think that we have, these carefully constructed instrumentations that people can actually feel, because there is that construct, that conscious construct and that intuition mixing. And I think that my experience singing in the Pentecostal church, which is very spiritual, adds a rawness to a lot of the sounds as well.
For sure.
And that is what drives my vocal delivery. But I think the refinement of that rawness is heavily influenced by Feist, who has such an emotionally honest voice and lets all the details come through, all the quivers, the breaths.
An authentic revelation.
It's so present. I feel like I'm in the room there, swimming in a pool of her emotions when I listen to her vocals, and I wanted people to feel that detail in my voice. And so I'm still obsessed with her music, but I read the Sound on Sound article on how they captured her vocals and how Renaud Letran mixed it, and I studied audio engineering with Robbie Lakritz, who manages her and also records her. I wanted to understand that process, and then when I applied it to my voice, I found that it didn't work. So then I had to unfold and find my own way of doing that. And I think it was in Ian's influence of that conscious process that was able to make my voice and my delivery not so erratic, but my own natural, spiritually driven and raw approach to making music also made it emotive and also made it feel really real. And then I think the connection between us is dance hall. I love bass. Are we allowed to swear on this show?
Yeah.
I fucking love bass, man. I do. And the kick drum I need to feel it, beating in my chest. And I need that clap or that snare to snap. And Ian knows how to do that. And I think we both feel that, especially because Ian, when we got together, was DJing UK bass heavy music. And so there's some of the same sonic tools. So we were coming together with the same ingredients, but we just had different recipes for how we would construct songs. And I think people are hearing the tensions and the contradictions of our different approaches, but also because we are using the same musical loves, there is a cohesion to it as well.
Yeah, I mean, in highlighting your singing and how, dynamic it is, I think the music does this very similar thing. Like the music is I think your voice and this music and these arrangements, they're tone setters, they're mood setters, there's surprise. Even when Ingenue gets going, I'm just like, whoa, like it's a remarkable thing. And you both used the word tension a couple of times, and you've highlighted the fact that you were trying to tell stories of people that are maybe underrepresented, marginalized. Your current tour, if I have things correct, is called the Diversity Tour. And my understanding is there's a kind of a pointed nature to the naming of this tour, because diversity and tokenism and all sorts of things are floating around right now as we try to right wrongs, particularly in like sort of progressive indie rock circles. There's a lot of confusion about how to contribute. I think the well-meaning whites, they want to help, some of them, but they also, a lot of them are starting to realize that to help, they need to make space for others to do the work. But it's confusing, and I'm sorry, I'm going on and rambling about where I think this diversity tour idea was maybe born. But can you let's go with Alana on this one. Can you expand upon why you are on a tour called the Diversity Tour?
Well, it first started with Vivek Shraya of Too Attached, who has become a dear friend of mine.
Too Attached are the other band on this tour, right?
Yeah. They released an album called Angry that's about, quote, POC anger, and about not shying away from pointing out more subtle forms of racism that could go unnoticed, and is a nuanced view on this particular perspective that you're sharing of like there are well-meaning white people who want to do the right thing but aren't always doing the right thing and may not realize
Might
it.
be doing way worse things.
Yeah, and because they're well-meaning, I don't want to shit on them. They're trying, they're not racist per se. And Vivek was just like, no, I'm gonna point these things out. And she wanted to do a tour with Bonjay. We're fans of each other's music, and I sang on the Too Attached record. And I like having a clearly articulated idea. And I was just reflecting on, whenever I'm in a band with a white guy. For those who don't know Bonjay, I'm black, Ian is white. But when I'm conversing...
And Ian's a robot.
Yes, Ian is a white
I'm very
robot.
white. I'm half Polish and half kind of UK, so some of the whitest jeans
Yeah, that's pretty
you'll
white.
ever encounter.
You're also wearing white jeans. I don't understand. There's no subtlety to this.
Ice Beast.
But when I'm talking to, I hate this term, but my artist friends of color, we'll joke about the sad fact that if you get more than one band of color on a bill, it suddenly becomes the ethnic something.
Yeah.
And at the end of university, it was my job to do communications in one of the diversity offices for the federal government. And so I spent my days working with well-meaning white people, but I could also see the disconnect between the outcome of some of the efforts and the intention. And as we talked about, as we thought about the way we live in cities today, the beauty and the chaos and the possibility of so many different people interweaving, you know, it sounds like this utopia, like this multicultural utopia where we can all come together and live together, and who knows what can happen. And we assume that in the who knows what can happen and the possibility, it's only a positive outcome. But we're asking people to pool their differences together. That is an awkward and a messy thing. And so we just wanted to bring attention to the fact that I'm not entirely certain that we know what diversity means. We wanted to highlight the fact that we have these two bands that are fronted by people of color, and that in some ways it's likely that the tour would be kind of subtly marketed as such. And we also just wanted to have a good laugh, because it's just...
That's often what we end up having to do.
Yeah.
Is kind of satirizing the hardship on some level, right?
Yeah.
And kind of and trying to own it.
It's better than not feeling it, you know?
Yeah, feeling it and but also trying to... I hate to use the word cope with it. That's the wrong word. But it's actually trying to turn it on its head, I guess. It's just turning it on its head.
But also highlighting it in a way that doesn't take away from the necessary seriousness of talking about diversity and what it really means, but adding a little bit of levity and poking fun at anybody that thinks that, like, diversity, I believe in diversity, I love diversity. It's like, I don't know if you've actually lived with diversity, because it can be quite hard.
I want to come back to you on that notion of what diversity looks like to you in a positive way, but I actually want to flip the question to Ian now. Same question, basically. Like Alana's saying, like, people don't know what diversity means. Surely you two have talked about this at some point in your lives. Do you have a sense of what she means there, and what your definition of diversity is as the whitest person ever in Bonjay?
Yeah, I mean, I grew up in a really diverse neighborhood, so I'm kind of comfortable around these things. You know what I mean? Like
the topics, you mean?
Yeah, well, the topics are like the mix of people, for sure. Like my natural habitat is with the real mix of people. You know, one useful thing that I can add is that in designing the poster, we actually made a change at my request. Initially, so if you can picture the poster, it's people running a race, and it's like me up ahead. I have a starting point that's ahead of everyone else. And then the members of Two Attached and Alana are behind to various degrees. Like, I have an advantage from the beginning of the race. And we wanted something that was like funny and a bit provocative and all these when we were working with the artist, Stephanie Chen. And when it initially came back, it was like generic people. So like generic white person ahead of generic brown people. And I really wanted to change it. We kind of had a conversation and so on. And then in the end, we agreed to change it to being us as individuals, as real people. Because I think making diversity work is really valuable. Like, you look at the histories of like music scenes or great cities or whatever, and they always have a lot of different kinds of people who look and think differently, and they come together and they make cool new stuff. But I also feel like the most important thing is often engaging. And so I really wanted the poster to have us as individuals so that we could talk about like real people, right? And our own personal experiences.
You mean
and so
like, you mean depictions of you specifically? Like
exactly.
You guys and your bands specifically.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
It's an illustrated poster, and we wanted illustrated depictions of us.
Yeah. So that it was more about so that it was a starting point to a conversation about how did we make this poster and how do we feel about this, rather than a blanket statement about everyone who looks a certain way.
I think the word engaging is important, because something that I felt when I saw the generic portrayals of a white woman and then a row of brown-toned women on the track, it felt more humorous. But when I saw Ian and then us behind, I started to feel angry.
Yeah.
Just a slight pang. It felt very real to place myself in that situation, to have this mirrored back at me. You can't ignore it when you place yourself in it. And so I can understand why people don't want to engage with diversity, because it really is hard to see yourself in this place where you're not the only one, or where your ideas might be challenged. But I think it's important, like Ian says, to engage with diversities, because when your ideas are rubbing up against somebody else's, or when they're challenged, you're forced to think in new ways. And out of those new ways comes innovation and new possibilities. And so I think that that's why diversity should be more valued than it is, and why engaging with diversity is important. You have to feel it to really know it.
So does that speak to my earlier sort of question of your ideal of, not only your ideal of, I guess it is like your ideal of an understanding and appreciation of what diversity actually could be?
I think I'm still exploring what it is myself, but, like I said, I grew up with so many different kinds of people, or people of different backgrounds, and it wasn't always comfortable, but I did learn a lot. And I think that my ideal situation would be where we could sit with different people who live differently from each other and think differently, and be able to build a resilience to the resistance to that difference, to be able to accept the ebb and flow of not like the synchronicity, but just like be able to accept that, sometimes moments will be uncomfortable.
Yeah.
But I don't think that is a justification for, I don't think that overrides the benefit. I think there's more benefit than there isn't. Not.
You know what my take on diversity, the cultural product that gets closest to it.
You smiling and saying that, I was like, what are you going to say?
I think that the greatest show of this century so far has probably been the Chappelle Show. And I remember when that came out, that felt, for me and my friends, like, oh, here are people who joke around like us, right? And that is kind of the most racist show that's been on television in the last 20 years. But because people are engaging and talking about it, and
it's out there.
Do you think the Chappelle Show was racist, or do you think it was confronting and upending racism?
Well, he quit the show because people were taking it the wrong way, right? Like, have you heard this story? That he ultimately felt like they were not getting what he was intending.
But the show itself wasn't racist, but people were misinterpreting.
And I think he also had, from my recollection, he also had issues with management taking advantage of him and exploiting him and what he was bringing to the table, and not like, yes, there was a fan. You mean like its reception was misconstrued?
No. The story that I've heard is that he during one of the sketches, a cameraman laughed at a joke. It was like a white guy who was a cameraman who laughed at a joke, and he didn't sound like he was in on the joke.
Right.
That he was laughing at it in the crudest possible way.
I see.
And I mean, I'm sure it was many things, as it always is.
Yeah,
in
I mean, it was many
like
things.
This. But
it's not a coincidence that Dave went to Africa, I think, to find himself and figure that out.
Right.
Anyway, that's a bit of a tangent, but yeah.
Yeah. But anyway, that I wouldn't say that it has driven my impression of diversity, but it reflected me and the diverse group of friends who I grew up with. Here was someone who was able to joke around like we joked around and like take it to a whole other level.
Sure.
And so, yeah, I mean, diversity, this ethnic diversity matters, and gender and sexuality and all those things. But I would say that one of our beliefs is that we are two very different people, as comes up again and again.
Yeah.
And we really believe in engaging and listening and stuff like that. And so I think your take on diversity and all this is probably quite different from mine in some ways.
I don't know if the take is different, but the experience obviously is
definitely
is
different. Well, but I mean, like the Chappelle Show thing is real. I enjoy joking about these things, and I really enjoy being brought into the world of other people as well and understanding their perspective. And so, whenever we talk about these things, and we do talk about them from time to time, even when we disagree, I come away enlightened by the conversation.
Sure.
Yeah. I think again, that word engagement, like this conversation makes me uncomfortable, because I constantly feel like, when is the white man gonna say something wrong, and then is there gonna be some kind of conflict? I just want everybody to get along, but that's just not possible, But I think that it's important for me personally, because of my belief in diversity, to have more of these conversations. Yeah.
Yeah, no, I totally appreciate that. And I want to go back to Lush Life for a moment, though, because we've talked about diversity now, and we've talked about this notion of exploring, like I asked about your relationship or the relationship of this material to Toronto.
Mm-hmm.
And I think, Ian, you said, well, actually, it was more born from touring and seeing other places. But in the 7 years since you last released music, Toronto has changed immensely. And the perception of Toronto has changed immensely. This is a city that I think is now looked upon for beats, for musical innovation and production. Does Lush Life reflect a cityscape and Toronto in some way? And I think maybe it was taken too literally, and maybe that was my wording of like, did you make it sound like a city?
Yeah.
But you are Toronto artists now, full-fledged. If there was ever any doubt, does this music reflect a cultural moment in Toronto? If not the cityscape itself, but like, do you feel influenced by what the city has been up to in the last little while with the OVOs and OVO people and Kaytranada and all these people? There's all great beat makers here now. And I think people look to Toronto as this hub for this sort of thing. Ian, does that resonate with you? Or do you feel separate from Toronto?
I think I feel the same combination of influences, but we came up with our own thing. So I feel like being here, it would be really hard if we were still in Ottawa or if we were in most other places in the world to come up with this combination of dance hall and orchestral soul and
indie sentiment.
You know who I stupidly left out of that cohort of people was Lido Pimienta.
Oh yeah, she's great.
I really feel like Lido. I had this joke the other day that I said it to someone. I'm like, I feel like everything I listen to now, new, sounds like either Lido Pimienta or the Minutemen. Like almost everything sounds a little bit like Lido and a little bit like the Minutemen to me.
Is the Minutemen, is that like an old
It's an old punk band. No, they're a punk band. They were
Okay,
like one of the
straight punk.
first sort of post-hardcore
Okay.
kind of punk bands and innovative sort of jazz influence. Mike Watt and D Boone and anyway, they're just fantastic group from San Pedro. But that's just my frame of reference. And like I hear their influence now in everything.
Okay.
And I think they are quietly influential. And the same thing with Lido is like I feel like, and I'm not suggesting that you guys are sounding like Lido or anything like that, but it's starting to feel like this underground electronic music tradition that's coming out of Toronto is, I can feel kinship there.
Oh,
Well,
with Lido.
Yeah, when you talk about Kaytranada and like the Drakes of the world and things like that, I
Isn't
don't.
he from Montreal? Or does
No.
he live here now?
Drake?
No, Drake. No, Kaytranada.
Kaytranada.
Kaytranada's Montreal.
I think he's Montreal,
Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
But I associate him with so many Toronto artists just because of his...
He's so great.
Yeah.
Also,
I mean, I know
Yeah.
so
Yeah.
many Toronto artists who are really connected to him. So I think you're right, actually. That's a good point to raise. But anyway, yes.
But the similar sonic family.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Something's going on with Canada, I guess, as well. It's not just Toronto.
I don't feel an affinity with that
Yeah.
sound. I
Okay.
hear that sound. I run to that sound. I dance to that sound. But in terms of a kindred spirit, when you said Lido Pimienta, I relate to that because I feel like Lido, her music feels more of the world and could be incubated in Toronto.
Yeah.
Whereas a Drake sound, an OVO sound sounds like it can only come from Toronto. You know, like we started the album in Berlin. We mixed it in Hamilton. We played it in Kingston, Jamaica. We, wrote it and recorded it in Toronto and in different places. And I feel like our sound could only exist from going there and picking an ingredient there, whereas
But I feel
OVO feels like...
I would only argue that for all the kind of misgivings about multiculturalism, I'm becoming more informed about just how significant the Caribbean diaspora has been on Toronto.
Oh, yeah.
Like the 60s, 70s. That has shaped a lot of the music we're hearing. And I'm hearing, like, when Drake puts out a mixtape or something and works with different people. Like I'm starting to hear that Toronto more.
Yeah.
And again, I'm not saying you guys are part of that necessarily, but when I think of Lido and I think of that aspect of Drake and OVO and you guys, I hear what you're saying. I hear the way I hear Toronto in terms of that kind of music. I hear the world. I hear different parts of the world coming through this filter of Toronto. That's kind of what I was getting at.
Oh, for real.
And that's where Lush Life, as an exploration of city experiences beyond this city, speaks to me. Like it is a global perspective on city life. And it's coming out of Toronto. And that's where I see the connection, and I finally articulated it properly.
Hey, you know what? There's a great quote from James Joyce, who I'll admit to never having read anything by, but
Except
why
this
he
line.
why he wrote about Dublin all the time, even
yeah.
though I guess he didn't live there later on. But he says, why did they write about Dublin? In the particular is contained the universal. So the idea that you tell these individual stories about a time and a place, but if they're well told and you feel like you're there and you feel like what they're feeling, then you can relate to them, even if your situation is different. You know, something funny, when we released the last EP, you know, you can like go online and have a sense of who's listening and who's following you and stuff like that. There were a lot of foreign exchange students from Africa and South Asia who were going to school in the West who were listening to the Bonjay songs, right? And I always felt like that was, you know, that's a real audience that we connect with, because we're telling these stories of not feeling entirely at home anywhere. As I think of us as we're trying to build that new home, right? Like every generation has its own music. We're trying to be some of the culture that helps to make everyone feel included, because those are the people that we're writing about. So, I mean, Toronto, for all of its failings, is one of the best places in the world to do that. We're trying to make all these things work. It's really hard, but hopefully we keep kind of learning and getting a bit better at it.
Yeah. Lana, do you have any thoughts on that?
Well, I did want to say that, we started writing the record in Berlin, and it is, you know, very Toronto in many ways. But Lush Life isn't just about the way we live in big cities today. You know, it is the small and mid-sized cities, like mixing in Hamilton. Some of the best shows, the most fulfilling shows we've had have been in Guelph, you know, where there's just this openness. I don't know if it's because it's a smaller place and so people don't take opportunities for granted. Guelph is a place, you know, there are many students, they're there for a purpose. And they've chosen to be there, and so they're really living life and taking advantage of their time there. But yeah, I wanted to recognize that you don't have to come to Toronto to be innovative. You know, being in Hamilton,
You don't have to tell me.
yeah,
We've had some of our best nights in Guelph.
I'm telling
for
people
sure.
who are listening that in Hamilton we were so inspired, first of all, by the analog synth collection that exists in so many artists there. But Azari and Alphonse Lanza of Azari and Third is from there, who's the cousin of Jesse Lanza, who's from Hamilton, who worked with Jeremy Greenspan, who's the unofficial mascot of the city, and Orphix and Testy, who's a techno longtime icon who released a huge single when he was a teenager. Caribou from Dundas or just outside,
Just
and
Dundas,
members. Yeah, there's this place that took the available tools and ingredients, and they were free from industry expectation, and they had suddenly abandoned steel mills when that industry crashed, and they used their boredom to create new sounds, and because they had this pastiche of tools and influences that could only exist in that place, that their sound could only come from that place. They didn't have to go to Toronto and meet with big producers. They just needed to pool their ideas together. And also, when you're in a small town, if you have a party, my understanding is, because I did a doc on this, the kids who liked Detroit techno were also the kids who were making industrial music, who were also the kids listening to pop radio, and all these people are interacting, and it's like this petri dish for musical ideas. And so it isn't just the Berlins and the Londons and the New Yorks and Torontos of the world. It's also the Hamiltons. And you look at Kingston, Jamaica, it's not a big city, you know, and it's made some of the most popular music, the longest standing innovative music in the world.
I think of Bristol and Virginia Beach.
Yes.
Too, right?
Timberland,
like the Timberland and the Neptunes and
of the
everything.
world.
Yeah, these are not big places, but part of it is just pure stubbornness and adventurism.
Yes.
Yeah, but I think also just you have to make your own culture sometimes when you're in a place like that.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's not coming to you. Well, I want to know, we've already established it's been a long time since your last release, and I don't mean to beat that to death, but it does beg the question. So Lush Life is out. What's next? Ian, what happens for Bonjay after the Diversity Tour? What happens? Like, are there already plans afoot for more music and more activity?
We were talking about it today. Yeah. How much do we want to talk about that?
Well, first I'm going to sleep. That's what I'm going to do.
Yeah.
And then, like I said, we have music that isn't necessarily on this record, but stories that still need to be told and songs that are completed. And so I anticipate some more music on the horizon. And also, we haven't talked about this at length, but Lush Life is a thinking man's record that you can move to. You can still dance and sway to it. But there's a lot of weight to it, talking about these topics. And there are some songs that I pushed against because I think have the darkest sensibility in the band. I'm ready for some levity and for some fun. And so I'd like to pull out some of Ian's productions and maybe get ready for be inspired by Caravana. And there's more music coming for sure. And
do some soca
collaborations and remixes and all that.
Sweet.
Yeah.
Awesome. Great. Well, where can people learn more about Bonjay these days?
I would say go to bonjay.net.
Okay.
And that is your entry into the Bonjay. My hands are going in all kinds of directions.
Yes.
Facebook and Instagram. Bonjay.net.
Bonjay.net. Okay. And people can learn more about picking up the record there too.
Yeah.
What formats is it available in this day and age?
Digital formats at the moment. So, yeah. Google, we're the only Bonjay. Bonjay.
Good job.
Yeah.
That's hard to do even these days, is to have a band that you can easily find on the internet. So.
Completely not strategic as well.
No.
Us, people saying the Grenadian expression, where it comes from,
Right.
Island of Grenada in the Caribbean,
And
and some Filipino people,
a Filipino
woman
politician?
who ran for deputy mayor of Manila in the Philippines.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Good
That's her
Bonjay,
name.
Bonjay, Bonjay. That was her campaign
Yeah,
song.
so if you find that one, it's not but everything else is.
Good company to keep, really.
But
Yeah.
Bonjay.net, Lush Life is out digitally on all platforms on May 25th. We're
Okay.
really excited about it.
Good. Well, congratulations.
Thank you.
Is there a single song from Lush Life that we can go out on right now?
Yeah, I think we should listen to Medicine for Melancholy. It's a song that is releasing the energy and the frustration of having an identity rooted in duality, you know, where you feel like you haven't quite found your place in the world, but then you realize that you can carve out your own.
Okay. That's thought-provoking in itself.
But it's just, you can just dance to it.
You can just dance.
It feels really good.
This is new music by Bonjay. Alana, Ian, thank you so much for making this record and
Thank
for
you,
being on this show. It
Vish.
means a lot, and I wish you the best of luck with everything.
Thank
Thanks.
you.
I can disguise any side. I'm a spy aiming for life. I can try for the night. Oh, Zadie knows elongated eyes and O's won't get me through glorified glory holes. On some days I don't
Special thanks to Alana and Ian of Bonjay for being on this, the 398th episode of Creative Control, which is part of the Entertainment One podcast network and is available on all iOS and Android platforms and also on things like Spotify and YouTube and Audio Boom as well. If you can't find an episode that you're looking for, or if you wish to learn more about me and sign up for my regularly scheduled newsletter, please visit my website, vishkhanna.com, VISHKHANNA.com. You can like Creative Control on Facebook. You can follow us on Twitter at VishCreative, or follow me at Vishkhanna. You can listen to a radio show version of Creative Control on Wednesdays at noon Eastern Standard Time around the world at CFRU.ca, or on an actual radio at 93.3 FM if you're in or near Guelph. Please consider visiting patreon.com/Creative Control to make a flexible monthly donation to keep this podcast going. Your donations, your pledges, they're all very, very appreciated. So thank you very much for considering doing that. Patreon.com/Creative Control. Thanks again to all the people who make in-kind donations to the program via goods, services, and whatnot. I'd like to thank Jim Guthrie for letting me use the instrumental version of his song, The Rest Is Yet to Come, to end this show each and every week. Learn more about Jim at jimguthrie.org. And finally, last but not least, thank you for listening to this episode. I hope you learned things about Bonjay that you didn't know before. And thanks for continuing to support the show just by listening to it, telling your friends about it, rating, reviewing it, all those sorts of things. Downloading episodes, that's a big thing. If you can do that, that would be great. And then just spread the word. Tell people about this show, Creative Control, and hopefully they will find something they like about it, maybe. Who knows? That's all for me for now. I will talk to you soon. See you later. Bye for now.